Hello guys, welcome to the Underdogs Podcast, episode 4 of the most scuffed but the only English broadcast about PCS. Let's jump right into it as we have much to talk about, including the All-Pro teams and MVPs and NIPs. I kept really from doing an episode mainly due to the fact that there wasn't much content before round 3 and I really wanted to incorporate MVP and MIP to the discussion about first teams because feels like a nice round out to make. So first team, it's alright. It has Driver, Maple, and Betty. Maple was on my second All Pro. Betty and Driver were on my first All Pro, and I did mention that Maple and Minji are basically. You can basically switch them around and it's alright. One can be on the first team, the second one be on the first team, and I'm completely okay with that. And Minji is on the second All Pro team, so that is perfectly okay for me. I am okay with Junjia, even though I didn't cover him in my All Pro teams at all, and I've had my reasonings for that. If you want to know why, make sure to watch the episode 3 of the Underdogs podcast. But what I really do not kind of understand here is Keres being actually the first All Pro. I do think that he did really capitalize on Betty's just really abusing AP Kaisa in the first half, and in my opinion he did have some game-losing engages for BYG. He sometimes was over-inger on the trigger, and he, in my opinion, wasn't as good as it is presented here, basically. His champion pool is still a problem, like, he's still one of the players that can play only tanks, but this champion pool issues when it comes to our supports is a very rampant issue, so there's that. Coming down to the second All Pro, we have something more aligning, as we have Ajay, we have Kongyue, we have Minji, Wako, and Enso. So Kongyue was first on my All Pro team, and so did Minji, but apart from that, Ajay, Wako, and Enso were on my second All Pro team, so I am completely okay with that. The only thing that I'm surprised is actually that Keres is first All Pro and there is no Woody, and I mean the most egregious thing, to be honest, is the fact that there is no third All Pro team. Like, just simply, where is it? It is really surprising that there is no All Pro third team, because all of the nuances are most of the times in these third All Pros. If you look at EU, if you look at China, if you look at Korea, 2 All Pro teams were basically made up of the top 2 teams in the league. In our case, it's top 3 teams, which is slightly better, but I doubt that third All Pro will be filled with people like Lava. It is definitely really surprising, because there could be so many conversations about who is actually the third All Pro top laner, who is the third All Pro mid laner, who is the third All Pro support, including the fact that Keres is in the first one. Like, this definitely broadens the conversation there. Who even is the third All Pro AD carry? Like, for example, the third All Pro team for me was Taco 665, 1116, Chris Kata, and I think, yeah, it was Woody. 665 was there mostly because I just wanted to highlight his play in the first half of the split. So I understand that many people will just not agree with me on this one, but like, Taco was probably the third All Pro, and if you didn't, and you still could have had arguments for somehow solo kill, though I really wouldn't agree with solo kill being third All Pro. You could have arguments for even possibly Likai, though I wouldn't agree with that as much as well. you could have. I mean, some people maybe would have picked up Rest anyway, even though he was the player that was slumping the hardest when CFO was actually on the lose streak. I definitely think that the fact that there is no third All-Pro team is just not nice. Like, was the third All-Pro AD carry? Like, I would say Chris Kata, some would pick Shun, some even would pick Tide, some even would pick Eminem, and I would definitely not agree with that, but his statistics are very good, so maybe some people would pick him. And in support, like, you have Wood, you have Kaiwing, you have Xiaoxi, who was on my first All-Pro. I mean, there's just so much to there are so much stuff to actually debate about in the third All-Pro team, and it's extremely, like, it was just unnecessary to not cover the third All-Pro. Like, this was unnecessary and uncalled for, and this is just taking away something that really didn't have any negative value. So there is it. The most potential player in OCE. I would say this award should have gone to Taco, given the requirements for the award, when the requirements for the award is that you needed to be registered in for more than 2 seasons. This effectively eliminates Relia from the equation. But I would still say that Taco did deserve it more than Nuli. Nuli was the most consistent part from West Point, that's for sure. He was a really good Jace. He was given that Jace a lot, and I think that this also skewed him a little bit. But yeah, I mean, he was definitely in consideration for me. So despite the fact that I do not agree, I'm okay with how this award goes. I think that the fact that there is no third All-Pro team is definitely the most egregious thing of these awards. And we also have best coaching staff in J team. And once again, I do understand where this is coming from, but I disagree. I definitely understand that the difference between spring and summer for J team was massive. And I think that this also came off very hard from the side of Driver, as in my opinion he should have been an MVP if we do not count playoffs, but we will get that on when we actually talk about MVP and MIP. But to be honest, I think that Beyond Gaming did deserve that award more, simply because I just think that BYG coaching staff just took more out of the face value of the players that they have. Like, I am not a big fan of Likai. I think he's actually a borderline bottom 3 top laner and has been for a very long time. I think that Kongyue is just not a player that will carry you the league, and he's a player that falters in playoffs when push comes to shove. People just kind of adapt to his playstyle over the course of the splits. I think 11-16 is, he used to be a flip and now he is just kinda alright. He is probably the best Nico in the league, but apart from that, like, he definitely shifted very hard from his inconsistent carrying playstyle to a somewhat consistent of an engager, and this was definitely a very interesting change from 11-16. And then you have Betty and Keris, and I would say that Keris wasn't even like perceived as a hyper good support who deserves the All-Pro first team, who would definitely deserve first All-Pro team in the beginning of the split. He definitely developed very hard with Betty. Betty definitely helped him get the performance that he had, and they were definitely dominating in the bot lane. So, I think that BYG is the best coaching staff, and looking at how it went in playoffs, I became even more validated to that opinion. But we'll touch that in a minute, as we will also go to the MVP and then MIP. So, there are 2 angles at which you can look at those awards. There is the angle at which you count in playoffs, and there is the angle where you don't count in playoffs. And if you do not count in playoffs, then I disagree with Betty being the MVP. I think that Driver was simply as dominant as Betty for a longer time in his role. You could, I mean, this is simple as I think that Driver has been as dominant on more champions throughout longer period of time, and this is kind of sad to me. I really wished I could see the votes actually for these awards, but I don't think this will be the case. So I would really hope that this happens. If we count him playoffs though, I would agree with Betty getting the MVP. Simple as. Because J-Team just collapsed in playoffs, and Driver was kind of a part of it. Though he wasn't definitely the biggest piece of the puzzle, not even the second biggest piece of the puzzle for that, but if we count on playoffs, then I'm okay with Betty. If we don't, I'm not okay with Betty being the MVP. And the reverse comes with the MIP, who is Lauva. So if we don't count in the playoffs, I wholeheartedly agree, Lauva is the most improved player. He definitely took some time to really develop himself. But he, in the end, played really good in week 5 and 6. In playoffs though, if we count in playoffs, Lauva completely collapsed. You could say that it was because of the draft differences. You can say it was because Minji underperformed. You can say because it's Driver underperforming. Like, all the pieces just crumbled around him. That's alright, but I don't think But at the same time, I could just make an argument that he was just carried by the fact that he had the best solo lanes in the regular split. So I definitely think that Lava does deserve that if we only count on regular split, but if we count on playoffs, then I think that Lava definitely let us down. Okay, so yeah, that's it for the awards. Once again, I mean, I am very disappointed that there is no third All-Pro team, but let's just talk about playoffs then, and we will go over the matches. PSG Talon versus CFO. We'll go from the finals and we will go down the bracket, as the playoffs were, the finals were great. Like, that's straight off, and there were so many good team fights to watch, so many multi-man engages from Rel, Jimmy and Smurfing on Hisione, Shun popping off, Rest popping off, even Aje popping off, Maple popping off, like, pretty much everyone aside from, I would say, Wacko had an extremely good series. And I mean, with Wacko, I would say that in this split overall, even, he has been the player that kind of became more consistent and really tried to just not go for these flip plays that he kind of has been known for a long time in the BCS. Like, Wacko was the player that either popped off or sometimes kind of lost the team fight, but now he's kind of doing neither, I would say. And maybe that's what PSG Talon needs, because they are just that very consistent, not really aggressive team that just kind of lets Junjia do his thing in the early game. Sometimes he will play towards Ajia, sometimes he will play towards the bot side, sometimes he will gank Maple, and then they just set up for the objectives and just kind of do their thing. Like, they just do what PSG Talon has done. They just do what PSG Talon was known for throughout all of these years. Like, there was a slight break in spring when they really played for Junjia, and at MSI it just didn't really work. They backtracked, and they won another championship with that playstyle. Whether this is actually the better way to play, I am not sure. But both ways work, and the Lilia game definitely showed that they can still let Junjia play on the carries. When it comes to CFO, I mean, it's really nice to see CFO being the team that it actually was in the beginning of the split, and last year in summer as well. Rest is back on form, which is very huge. He had a massive slump in the second half of the split when CFO really went to these loss streaks, and Jimin actually showed some hard cavalry potential on the Azir and on the Yone, which was really surprising to me, as I did depict Jimin as someone who kind of lacked the X factor. But this time he was actually the one that pushed the brakes on some of PSG Talon's opportunities, and really kudos to him on that. It was a very good series from him. Shun, also a good series. He was definitely the third or even fourth best player. I would actually say that Xiaoxi maybe played even a little bit better than Shun, but I mean, with how the other players went with their series, I mean, he still played good and still a good outcome. I am definitely hyped with what PCS will bring out to the players, and I really hope that we actually manage to upset the World Qualifying Series teams and maybe snatch both seats for ourselves. It would be a really nice thing, because I think that both PSG Talon and CFO are definitely on even grounds, and I mean, this final was basically won by the side selection. Like, every game was won by blue side, and if sides were reversed, maybe CFO would actually like defend their summer title at least. Overall, looking forward to Worlds. I think this is going to be interesting. Like, no matter whether Golden Guardians or BDS make it to Worlds, this is definitely going to be an interesting matchup to watch. I would say that the major region teams are still slightly favored, but I definitely think there is a room for the upsets. So let's go. BYG versus CFO, and this was the ultimate triumph of blue side over the red side, as BYG was the team that really liked to pick off that red side and get some cheeky counter picks for players like Kongyue or even 1116 or even Likai at times. And well, 1116 is the only player that really made a static LeBlanc work, which was a very unique, like, 1116 was definitely a very unique player for the standards of PCS, and this was kind of a double-edged sword, as Jimin definitely did have his comfort picks in the series, and this really enabled him to play well in that series as well, but this was still Shun's series. Rest was kind of on the back foot, as he was camped way harder by Kongyue than on the PSG series, in my opinion. Maybe not way harder, but harder, simply. And this was just simply another banger series before the finals, and it was just really interesting to see many different compositions across the board. Like, we've had the Fiora, we've had the Nocturne coming out, we've had the EAP we've had the LeBlanc, we've had 1116 Annie, we've had the Ari, we've had the usual Jace Azir, we've had the Poppy versus Rel, which was a severely underused matchup in the finals. And I mean, actually, were they banning out Poppy? I mean, yeah, they were not banning Poppy, so yeah, this was a severely underused matchup in playoffs, in the finals, and in the playoffs overall. But overall, I mean, you just take out the Kaisa from Betty and he isn't as hard of a carry anymore. That's just simple as. Kongyue is still not the man that carries you the whole league, though he is still probably, apart from Junjia, the best jungler. And I mean, you could even argue that he is a better jungler because Junjia definitely with PSG's playstyle does not really have that much agency in the game, and sometimes he actually just kind of becomes invisible. But yeah, that's just my opinion on that regard. Overall, BYG, I wouldn't say that their core has changed much. Like, Likai and 1116 are still the same players, and yeah, 1116 kind of did change with his champion pool, but in terms of their actual ceiling, they didn't really change at all. And it's kind of sad that BYG actually forgot how to play their Spring playstyle, because with the Fiora you definitely want to make her fat, you definitely want to play top, you definitely want to play for the side lanes, and this was something that Beyond Gaming didn't really execute, and the loss came accordingly. It was the fastest game, and it was simply because they did not play to their strengths, and that's how you lose games improperly, basically. They just kind of went standard with that, with mostly annoying mid laners, just all cards in the Betty basket, sometimes with a little detour with a carry on Likai. Sometimes with a little detour with Kongyue on the carries, but overall I just think that they got defeated simply because their ceiling wasn't as high as CFOs or PSG Talon. I will say though that BYG had very good preparation coming out to all of the series, especially with the J-Team one. Like, I definitely appreciate how many strategies they have prepared in their playstyle. Like, you can see the Gragas being almost flexed. Like, you've had the Gragas snatched away from Driver in the J-Team series. You have Gragas mid lane here, countering the Zac, completely making his game completely miserable. And I mean, this was simply a very nice series to watch. Definitely if there was definitely an angle where BYG wins some of these series and actually goes to Worlds, but maybe luckily for us they didn't. I definitely didn't want to see Likai at Worlds again, because he would get stomped by most of the players out there. I am a Likai hater, I'm so sorry, even it's just force of habit to dunk on Likai. I mean, oh yeah, and I mean, like, J-Team versus BYG was just such a beautiful outdraft. Like, this series was straight off a draft diff all over the board. J-Team definitely had some extremely interesting strategy coming down. Like, they have banned Jace, that was one of the best picks from Minji, and they've had blue side 2 times. They could have picked the Jace, but they actually first picked Tristana, and Minji looked terrible on the Tristana. Do not trust these statistics. Minji had some absolutely atrocious game-losing plays. Like, the highlight is the game-free Freeman Buster shot that actually knocked BYG's backline away from flank from Driver and absolutely lost them the teamfight, which maybe could have won them the game. Like, Minji definitely in that BYG series completely choked, which was very interesting because in 2022 he was actually a player that did not perform well in the regular split. Like, he was known for only playing the assassins. He was known as the player that kind of didn't perform as well on standard mages, and then in playoffs suddenly just popped off and basically carried BYG to Worlds. And this time he was a beast in the regular season, and he just faltered when it comes to playoffs. He completely choked, and he was one of the main factors from which J-Team got to that 0-6 finish in playoffs. The second factor is, though, that Bruce completely cannot play Pikaisa. And this caused BYG to have a Pikaisa all of the time, because they placed priority on things like the AP LeBlanc, like the Jace, like the Annie. And that really backfired on them, so... Yeah, I mean... It was certainly interesting. Like, Driver did also underperform, and Lava did not really have any lanes to play around, which was definitely something like... Definitely thrown him off of his comfort zone. And overall, I mean... Yeah, I mean, BYG just straight off draft div them, like... The carry junglers prepared, like... Kazik, like the... Kha'Zix was alright, but the Gragas jungle just taking it out in R4, taking it away from Driver when we knew 100% that Driver would take that one. It was really a masterpiece when it comes to the draft, and it actually just straight off won BYG the game on the spot, in my opinion. And the Kha'Zix was unstoppable. Like, this was certainly the best series for Kongyue, and it was on the back of immaculate preparation from Beyond Gaming coaching staff, and that's why I say that I feel validated after playoffs that BYG should have gone for the best coaching staff. Like, this series is the prime example, like these two teams just battling it out and just pure prep and draft div coming out from BYG. And when it comes to second game of J-Team, it is kind of a different story. Minji still underperforming, but not as much, but Lava just completely collapsing under Frank's gameplay, and like Pretender having an extremely good game, Solo Kill having an extremely good game. Like, Pretender on standards carries is just an absolute beast, and it is kind of a letdown that Frank really wants to force him on those engagers. It's really, I mean, Frank just looks the best playing complete standard, and they try to branch out, and sometimes it's, I mean, in majority of times it just doesn't work, and when they come back to playstyle, to their normal playstyle, that's when they perform the best, and you can see that even in the statistics. Pretender just played the Jace Talia Azir, and he's suddenly most kills, most DPM with the least gold, not with the least gold, but like with lower gold than them. I just think that they are kind of playing to the maybe to the wrong side, and I mean in CFO Frank it was kind of more visible, because you've had the games where they went for the Nocturne Nico and it didn't work. They had the game with Annie that actually worked to my amusement, and Pretender wasn't really as bad as previously on the Annie, which was kind of surprising to me. We know that Viego is a prime carry pick in this meta, and many players are just very good Viegos. So it isn't that surprising that Kenny-chan actually managed to have impact on that pick, but I still think that they are definitely overusing the Nikos and the Annies in the draft, and CFO just kind of abused that. With Nico, they went to 1, and the unfortunate Xerath pick that wasn't really well drafted around. Like, you definitely need to ban out Maokai if you are having Xerath on your team. You definitely, I mean, he had enormous amounts of peel, but somehow they were, CFO's players were still getting to him, and despite the game time, it really did felt like CFO just kind of snowballed the game out of their control. Like, Xerath's wave clear still made it difficult to end the game fast, but I mean, it's just kind of like, it is just the castles of BYG again, where maybe Frank's ceiling is just a little bit lower than CFO and PSG's. Like, Solo Kill is not really a player that carries you the games oftenly. Like, he's not a reliable carry, let's say it like that. So is Kenny-chan, and Kenny-chan, aside from the carries, is, I mean, not even aside from carries, he is just only a slight improvement from Hollow. Pretender is Pretender, like, his Nico isn't good at all, and I am really surprised that they are just, like, why don't you give it, why don't you just give that pick away? Like, they gave it away once, and they actually won the game, so where's the problem? I mean, Eminem is still the Mr. Consistent. That still isn't going to carry you the games most times, but he absolutely unleashes the DPM when he has the correct pieces around him, and Skywing is just Skywing. Like, he is the sport GOAT in the region, but he definitely did not look as good in Frank as he did in PSG. And he also had some game-losing plays in this split, like the tiebreaker hook that lost them the CFO tiebreaker is definitely the highlight on just sometimes really bad decision making from Skywing, and I do have the same issue with carries, and I did not really have that issue with Chelsea. That's why I'm kind of surprised that Chelsea wasn't in the All-Pro teams instead of carries there, but I mean, that's how they were picked. And I mean, anyway, like, just, I don't get it why Frank just tries so hard to branch out when it's just, like, it's just, they are just bashing their heads into a wall with something that didn't really work as well as they could have as they wanted it to be, basically. So enough with Frank, let us get to DCG. And DCG performed exactly as I expected. Like, they definitely didn't choke as hard in BSO5s as they did previously, but they are not the innovative team anymore. Like, this is just not, every single player that made this team innovative is pretty much not here anymore. Like, the innovative core was Leaky and Woody, and they are not here. So that is no longer the identity of the team. Like, it is just lane dominance. Hana, I mean, I would say Hana definitely did play very well these playoffs, and kudos to him for that play, because he was definitely the best looking player for DCG, but his champion pool issues are still very prominent, and yeah, I mean, that was just it. Like, his champion pool issues are still very prominent, and they were somewhat of an issue, but not as big as the fact that Hanabi and Mission just completely lack their just game sense when it comes to team fighting at later portions into the game. Like, their decision making is just straight off bad, and they completely cannot translate their laning leads into something more meaningful. Kriskata is still the player that kind of stands in Shun's shadow. Like, in the regular split, I would still say that he performed better overall, and in the regular season he was the most prominent member of DCG, but he himself isn't really enough to carry this team. Maybe if there was a Betty or a Wacko here, maybe DCG would have looked better, but I mean, that's just Betty and Wacko. Like, there are a limited amount of players like this in the league, and DCG is just a team that didn't work so far at all. They cannot be admitted. You can still see they are those dominant laners that we know and love, and they showed some actually good play style. Like, they were holding on to these games, like they were holding on to these even game states by picking off so many members of CFO, and that's what PSG also capitalized on, like just picking up with those CFO members. But the ultimate but the ultimate difference is that DCG couldn't absolutely clutch it in the team fights for their lives, and it is really sad to look at this core of Hanabi, Hana, Mission, and Priscata just kind of performing on this level when you kind of expect from the name values that they would be title contenders, and they really were not from the start. And when it comes to the OCE teams, I'm not even going to bring out the series because there's too much of them, and this is going to be very short when it comes to the Australian teams. I definitely think that they have good mechanics, their macro is off, some of the players' mechanics are also off, but the highlight players really for me were Wynot and Biopanther. Wynot played extremely well on the jungle, and that is considering that he was playing versus the better junglers than Chiefs did. Like, I think that Wynot maybe deserves a chance in another region, or like if you want to build a super team, like I think he is definitely the player that you want to have in it when it comes to Oceania. And Biopanther was just phenomenal on the Renekton, simple as. Like, Biopanther was definitely the main reason why Chiefs actually won 2 games in playoffs. And I mean, winning 2 games, I think it's actually a success for Chiefs. Like, this was exactly what I expected, but I also think that is a success. For Bliss, I definitely didn't expect to get for them to be 3-0'd by CFO, but they at the harder side of the bracket. And I mean, CFO did look better than in their loss streak, and they've had their impressive run from that from 8-2 to 9-9 and to Worlds. So what can you really argue against here? Like, I don't think you really can be dissatisfied here as Oceania. Like, you have done your minimum and that's all. So anyway, like, just straight off kudos to Wynot and Biopanther. Huge highlights from the Oceanic teams. Anyway, I'm just going to give you out the power rankings as they are until after playoffs. There are some changes here, obviously, like Rest is coming back to the top, Junjia is back to the top, like, kind of just because, to be honest. Like, I definitely do think that I just kind of like, if I was just to take the value of his gameplay as it stands, I would definitely still keep him on an A+, but I still see that he is mainly a carry player, and the current PSG playstyle is kind of suffocating him from having any agency. And I think that he definitely deserves some more agency in those drafts. And if actually PSG managed to incorporate both the standard playstyle and the Junjia carry playstyle into their books, and are able to actually draft around them pretty flexibly, I think that Junjia definitely would shine again, as he did in spring. When it comes to the mid lane, Jimin and Minji basically switching sides, also Pretender getting a little bit higher because he actually looked better on the engagers. When it comes to the AD carry, you have Shun actually going to A+ and going over Chris Kata, because he actually came back to his top form in the end of the playoffs. Apart from that, nothing really changed here. I think Wako was an A+ before, and then when it comes to this sport, like Woody just goes over Xiaoxi, and that's it, to be honest. And when it comes to teams, there was a major reshuffle. There, like, you just simply have the teams, the playoff teams, kind of in according to their standings in playoffs. And you can argue whether CFO is maybe a little bit better because they didn't have that third blue side game. You can argue that PSG is better because they simply just won the finals and get good. You can argue that BYG definitely deserves to get a second chance, but I mean, let's just not put that much thought into it. Like, we've had the head-to-head matchups for the most part, except for like Frank. But between those three teams, we've had the head-to-head matchups, and that's how the playoffs went. So I don't think there is much to argue about. Like, this is just, I think, a default stance. Let's just depict it like this. J-Team goes to A-, but I think even in their playoff form, they still will win versus West Point and Helpix. I would still think that this was what would happen, but there's some room to doubt it. There is some room to doubt it, that's for sure. Anyway, let's move on to the other topic of this episode, which is actually going to be PCL, the second league that is actually going to give us promotions back to the league. So Impunity and Dewey's team will be fighting for their slot in the PCS, which is kind of going to be funny given that Dewey's team actually was very surprisingly one of the teams that assembled their own academy and participated in the Academy League, going 3-7, snatching 2 victories from West Point and even 1 win from Taipei Bravo, which is J-Team 2. If someone doesn't know about this, it is the academy team of J-Team. And here are the rosters. When it comes to some names that you may have known from the PCS, there's definitely Issue on the CG Academy. You have Wen in the mid lane from PSG Talon. You have TNS, who was a long-standing BYG sub. You have Pinway on Taipei Bravo. You have Calumnia in West Point Academy. You had Cresho from... he was actually playing... he was actually like a long-standing player. I think he was playing in Liab, as far as I remember. And maybe Alex, though we do not really like the Leaguepedia actually like showed that Alex for some part of the time, but it actually marked him off, so we do not really know whether it was this Alex. And as far as we know, it may not be the Alex, because Alex, as far as I am aware, is going to actually participate in the Open Qualifier, but we'll touch over the Open Qualifier in a minute, as we will briefly discuss how the league went. PSG Talon pretty much won every matchup aside from the DCG Academy. DCG Academy were actually the only team that managed to get an O2, get a win versus PSG Talon, and they actually got the O2 in the head-to-head. But they ultimately lost the tiebreaker to Taipei Bravo. Then CFO Academy, who was actually for a very long time the first place team before they lost to PSG Academy. Taipei Bravo, 3rd, DCGA 4th, Dewey's team 5th, and West Point Academy 6th. The news that this team was actually going on was a huge surprise pretty much to everyone. There were no rumors about it, at least scrolling around in the English space, and you can definitely have some questions like, where are the other teams' academies? Like, especially where is BYG Academy? Like, because you can kind of expect that Frank wouldn't really field an academy roster because just logistic issues, and I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't really have that much that much time to set up their structures, and just participating in tournaments wasn't really viable because there are not many. Like, maybe Frank could have set up an academy to play out in the Chinese tournaments, but as far as I know, these are just riddled with match fixing, and most of the like semi-professional stuff goes around LDL. I'm just talking about my ass. Why am I even saying this? But yeah, just no Frank Academy. Like, this was kind of half expected. Impunity Academy not being here is absolutely expected. They weren't completely budget this year with they pretty much just jumped the ship with letting just Southeast Asian players assemble the roster by themselves. You can actually get some more info about this in the second episode of the Underdogs podcast, when I actually had Impunity Smurf as my guest there, and we actually went over how that current roster of Impunity was formed, and how it really looked from the inside. So I definitely recommend you would watch it. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to the other teams, like, no BYG Academy is definitely a surprise. No Frank Academy is not really a surprise. No Impunity Academy is not a surprise, and no Helpix team, I would say, is also not a surprise, because they are just a team that was newly formed. They are a team that is kind of a compilation of one of the best players from the collegiate. Anyway, like, most of these players that you actually see right there are actually just collegiate players, apart from Duish, the new team, and West Point, who, I mean, West Point actually are just from Philippines, and Duish team just, I don't know where these players came from. Apart from this, that's all. Top 3 teams went to ASCI, but we will over that in a minute. When it comes to how the group stage ends, because the academies are only a fraction of the PCL. PCL consists of the group stage, the open qualifier, and the playoffs. And all of 6 teams to qualify for the playoffs to actually advance for the PCS promotion tournament. But the seeding goes in like this: you have a bye for top 2, you have winners bracket for 3-4, and you have losers bracket for 5-6. And the remaining spots on the losers bracket are actually going to get filled in the open qualifier. It is going to be here in the from 30th to 70th. I am aware of probably 2 rosters, and like 1.5 rosters that may come into the league, but I'm not going to mention this yet. You can definitely see the first team. I will definitely talk about the first team because it is really probable. Like, it is really, yeah, it probably will happen that we will see a roster of Weijie, Alex, I don't know the mid laner yet, but I think Hong too, and then LZ and Kino. Like, I'm definitely sure about Weijie, Alex, LZ, and Kino. I am not sure about Hong to being in this roster, but this is definitely one of the rosters that is going to participate in the open qualifier. And overall, 2 teams from the qualifier will qualify into playoffs, which is a standard PCS playoffs bracket. That's all on that part. Let's just move on, brush over briefly into ASCI. There were some rumors initially that Japan and PCS wouldn't participate actually, and it would be just VCS, China and Korea. And as you can see here, like Taipei Bravo being here is kind of a virtue of one of the VCS teams actually participating. It was supposed to be 4 Korean, 4 Chinese and 4 Vietnamese teams. Ultimately, all of the Vietnamese team, Chinese and Korean teams were the one who qualified, but PSG Talon was actually close and managed to win one game against Miaojing, who are the runner-ups from LDL. But Miaojing's game time was actually faster, so unfortunately PSG Talon did not manage to make the ultimate upset, and they didn't actually advance from the group, which would have been an extreme surprise for pretty much from everyone. Another surprise is that CFO Academy actually lost to Team Secret Academy, which Team Secret Academy was definitely the best looking Vietnamese team. Despite MG and Box participating in the VCS, it was actually the Academy that looked the best. And yeah, I mean, Taipei Bravo went 2-4, like, it was, apart from PSG Talon, it was just steered between China, Korea and the rest of the teams, and it really kudos to PSG Talon Academy for actually almost breaking the structure here and almost advancing to playoffs. This definitely gives some hope for the upcoming amateur and semi-professional academy scene for the PCS. And looking forward to more appearances in ASCI. I think that this is an extremely good idea to have, and I would really hope that the Western regions would actually incorporate a tournament like this into their system. But it isn't going to be possible for as long as EU finishes last throughout all of the regions. Especially if EU Masters. Anyway, one thing I will also go about, and I do not actually have this tab open, but I'm going to go briefly into it, is actually the Empyrean Cup, which is a event specifically made for the Philippines, and it is kind of surprising that Riot is actually investing that much into Philippines, but here we are, $1 million pesos prize pool for the top 4 teams. Double qualifier bracket, the double qualifiers with 256 teams set up for the qualifiers. At least this is the number that they are looking for. Only 4 teams from the qualifiers will actually advance. And yeah, I mean, as far as we've heard from the announcement, this is only a sign of more to come. As the Riot official on the interview said that there is more to come, basically. And I am kind of looking up to see how this actually works out, whether the Philippine scene actually gets revitalized, because it would really be nice if the Southeast Asian front actually started becoming more competitive, and you actually somewhat see this with how West Point performed this year. This is a Philippine org. They only had Relia in their roster when it comes to Philippine members, but when he actually came to Taiwan, Relia was the most prominent member of the roster, and I really hope that we actually get some of those teams back. Like, the Thai scene was the best Southeast Asian scene for the beginning of the PCS, and it's really sad that it just kind of disappeared after Boom Esports itself just vanished into thin air. not fielding any roster and just piecing out. It would really make the league more interesting from a narrative perspective, and I think it would be healthier for the viewership. So I am looking forward to more investments from Riot coming out to Southeast Asia, and I think that this is an excellent, it is really good to see them actually just even try to revitalize the scenes that have been kind of taken over by mobile by just negligence from Garena. And yeah, I guess this is going to be it for this episode. This was Meander for you, and this was the 4th episode of the Underdogs Podcast. I will see you at the next ones. See ya.